the last of the humans gathered in the underground bunker, a mixture of soldiers, scientists, and civilians who had somehow survived the relentless, years-long onslaught. Outside, Earth was a scarred, dying world. The alien invaders had come with technologies far beyond human comprehension, with fleets of ships darkening the skies, laying waste to cities in minutes. Humanity's strongest defenses had crumbled in days. But that didn't matter. They were ragged and exhausted, the weight of loss heavy in every breath they took, every glance they exchanged. Yet here, in the dim light of a bunker hidden beneath the ruins of what was once a thriving city, there was something strange in the air, a spark that even extinction couldn't snuff out. At the head of the bunker, a grizzled veteran named Harper stood before the crowd, leaning on an old rifle that had been passed down through generations. "We've lost everything," he began, his voice a hoarse rasp echoing in the silence. "Our homes, our friends, our families, they took it all, and yet, here we are." The room fell utterly silent. Every set of eyes turned to him, filled with fear and anger, but also a fierce, defiant glimmer. "Their tech is advanced. Their armies are endless. Their ships blot out the sun itself. They call themselves superior, call us weak, primitive, nothing but dust in the cosmic wind." He paused, letting the words hang in the stale air, but that didn't matter, did it? A murmur ran through the crowd, the people beginning to straighten, as though a forgotten strength was slowly rising within them. Harper pointed to an old, beaten-up map on the wall. "We've found a weakness, not in their weapons or their armor, but in their arrogance. They think they've beaten us, think we're animals waiting to be snuffed out, and that is where they're wrong." The crowd shifted, feeling the spark ignite into something tangible, something real. A young woman stepped forward. She was a scientist, one of the last who had worked at the research facilities before they were bombed into oblivion. "We have data," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They underestimated our adaptability. Their systems have a blind spot, a single point that we can exploit. If we can get close enough, we can take down their mothership and cripple their forces." The risk was monumental. Survival, unlikely, but that didn't matter. One by one, hands raised in silent agreement, their faces hardened with purpose. "It doesn't matter if we're outnumbered," Harper continued, his voice gaining strength. "It doesn't matter if they have weapons that can turn mountains to ash. It doesn't matter if we're nothing but a footnote in their history books, because we are human, and we don't give up." They set out that night, moving as shadows through the ruins of their world, climbing over rubble and wading through ash. Their makeshift weapons glinted under the faint light of a shattered moon. The journey was grueling. Some fell along the way, but the rest pressed on, unyielding. When they reached the alien stronghold, there was no rallying cry, no grand speeches. Each one knew the stakes, felt the weight of the world upon them, and they moved forward as one. In the end, it was the spark that carried them through. Against all odds, they breached the alien defenses, reaching the heart of the mothership. With their last strength, they unleashed the weapon they'd cobbled together from scraps and salvaged tech. As the explosion roared through the alien ship, lighting up the sky with a brilliance no star could match, humanity's spirit burned brighter than ever, because no matter how dire the odds, no matter how powerful the enemy, there was one thing they couldn't take: hope. It didn't matter how many times they tried to break humanity, because humanity was unbreakable. And in that moment, as the ashes of the invaders rained down, everyone knew it didn't matter.
They called it the Year of Ash, a year when sunlight barely touched Earth's surface, shrouded in an endless storm of dust from asteroid impacts that the invaders had used to cripple the planet. Crops withered, water grew scarce, and every breath was tainted with the bitter taste of despair. Survival became a ruthless contest, every day blending into the next as humans tried to cling to life. But in the middle of this desolation, in a remote underground facility where only the boldest dared venture, a light flickered. Ellie, a former solar engineer, sat huddled in the bunker's makeshift lab, her hands trembling from hunger and exhaustion. Across the room, a few others watched her intently. They were engineers, scientists, survivors, ordinary people who had once lived ordinary lives, but in this fractured world, they were humanity's last chance. Ellie examined the cracked solar cell under the dim emergency lights, her mind racing. She didn't have the equipment she needed, barely had enough power to run the lab lights, let alone build something functional. Yet the idea had stuck in her head like a spark that refused to die. finding a way to bring light back to Earth. We don't have enough to make a difference, a scientist muttered. Even if it works, it'll only last a few hours. Ellie looked up, her eyes fierce. It doesn't need to be forever, it just needs to be now. The others fell silent. She wasn't talking about a scientific breakthrough. She was talking about something else as simple, a flicker of hope. With their limited resources, they worked tirelessly through the nights. They used fragments of alien tech scavenged from wrecks, wiring salvaged from broken machinery, and batteries pulled from old, forgotten devices. It was nothing more than a patchwork creation, fragile as a promise in a world of doubt. When it was finally ready, they all gathered in the bunker's courtyard, their breaths visible in the cold, stale air. Ellie held up the device, a small sphere wrapped in makeshift solar panels, wires poking out at odd angles. She hesitated, looking at the faces around her, each one marked by the toll of survival. Today, she said, her voice wavering but resolute, we remind ourselves who we are, and we remind them that we're still here. She pressed the switch, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the bulb flickered to life, casting a soft, warm glow across the bunker walls. It wasn't bright, barely illuminating the faces around it, but in that dark, cold place, it felt like the first sunrise. A collective gasp filled the room, and Ellie saw tears in the eyes of those who had fought so long, lost so much. It was just a light, small, fragile, barely enough to push back the shadows, but in that moment, it was everything. Word of the light spread, echoing through the broken remnants of human communication networks. They called it the beacon, and for weeks, small groups of survivors made pilgrimages to see it, to feel its warmth for a few precious minutes before it flickered out. The invaders could darken the skies, poison the earth, and shatter human structures, but there was something they could never take: humanity's will to defy the dark, to rise even in the face of despair. In the end, the beacon didn't save them from the alien threat, but it saved something far more vital. It saved hope, and for those who saw it, who felt the light, they knew that as long as a single human could dream, it didn't matter what they faced, because the light in the dark was enough. The sky was a hazy red. As the last resistance fighters crept along the charred ridge, they moved slowly, staying low to avoid detection, every step a test of their endurance. For the past year, humanity had been on the run, scattered like ash on the wind, as the alien invaders raced the land and hunted down survivors. They had overwhelming firepower, shields that seemed impenetrable, and surveillance drones patrolling every corner of Earth. Humanity's defeat was supposed to be inevitable, but that didn't matter. Captain Rhea Calder led the group, her gaze fixed on the alien base looming in the distance. It was a fortress of dark metal, humming with an energy so foreign it made her skin crawl. The aliens had taken control of the mountain range, building their stronghold on the remains of Earth's own defenses. The base was enormous, its spires piercing the sky like twisted fingers. Her squad was small, a handful of soldiers and engineers who had survived countless skirmishes. They were weary, battered, carrying scavenged weapons and equipment. They'd barely managed to hold together. None of them had illusions about the mission's odds. In fact, they all knew it was a death sentence, but that was the whole point. They were here to make a statement that humanity would not go quietly. As they crawled toward the base, one of the soldiers, Eli, gave her a sidelong glance. "You sure about this, Captain?" he whispered, though he didn't need to ask. He'd been with her through every hopeless fight, every desperate escape, and he knew the answer. They all did. Rhea nodded. "We're here to remind them that Earth isn't theirs to take." Ahead, a massive blast doors loomed, guarded by alien sentries clad in sleek, black armor. Their eyes glowed a piercing blue, scanning the area with cold precision. Rhea signaled her team to hold, and with a silent gesture, they split off, each one taking a position in the shadows. They only had one shot. Rhea activated the small device on her belt, a pulse disruptor built from scraps of alien tech they'd scavenged. It would give them a 30-second window to scramble the guards' sensors, just enough time to launch a direct strike. As the disruptor hummed to life, Rhea signaled, and her team sprang into action. They moved like shadows, slipping past the guards and planting explosive charges at critical points along the base's outer wall. Each second felt like an eternity, their breaths shallow as they placed each charge with steady, practiced hands. When the final charge was in place, Rhea looked at her team. "This is for everyone we've lost," she said, her voice low but filled with a steely determination. They nodded, their faces set in grim resolve. They retreated to a safe distance, and Rhea hit the detonator. The mountainside erupted in fire and smoke, the fortress wall buckling under the force of the explosion. Alarms blared, and alien soldiers poured out, scrambling to defend their base from the unexpected assault. But Rhea and her team were already gone, slipping back into the shadows. From the nearby ridge, Rhea watched as chaos spread through the alien ranks. She knew they hadn't crippled the base, hadn't delivered any decisive blow, but the point wasn't destruction, it was defiance. It was a reminder that humanity would not be conquered. The aliens would eventually repair the damage, hunt down any remaining resistance. They would likely even find Rhea's team in time. But that didn't matter, the message had been sent. Rhea turned to her team, a fierce pride burning in her chest. "They can keep coming, keep pushing us down, but we'll rise every time. They'll never have the Earth, not really." And as they slipped away into the mountains, she knew that the spirit they carried would spread, like embers catching fire, because no matter the odds, no matter how many times they were beaten back, humanity's resolve would never break. Because surrender was not in their nature, and no matter what the invaders did, it didn't matter. Humanity was unyielding. The world was quiet, eerie in its stillness, as if Earth itself held its breath for what was to come. The alien forces had surrounded the final human stronghold, a fortress city called Haven, built in the mountains and hidden from the invaders for years. Now, it was the last bastion of humanity. They came in droves, descending from the sky in ships that blocked out the sun, darkening the valley as they took their positions. Their leader, a cold, calculating strategist named Zyrax, broadcasted a final message across the battlefield, reaching the minds of every defender within Haven. "Humans of Earth," the voice hissed, both chilling and dispassionate, "your time is over. Lay down your arms, and we will grant you the mercy of a quick end. Resist, and suffer the consequences of your defiance." Within the fortress, General Lyra Chen stood atop the watchtower, looking out over her people, engineers, medics, farmers, soldier civilians who had taken up arms when their backs were against the wall. She knew most of them by name, had fought alongside them in countless skirmishes. Their faces were tense, some filled with fear, others with a calm, determined resignation. They all knew what was coming. She turned to her second-in-command, a young man named Jared, who had once been a student studying to be a doctor before the world turned to ash. "Get the people to their positions. This is it." He nodded, but hesitated, his gaze searching her face. "You think we stand a chance?" Lyra didn't answer right away. She looked out at the vast army assembling below, a horde of alien warriors, their weapons glowing with a strange, pulsing energy. Their technology was superior, their numbers overwhelming. In every rational sense, humanity didn't stand a chance. But that didn't matter. Lyra's eyes hardened. "A chance? Mo, we have something better." Jared raised an eyebrow, curiosity mingling with his apprehension. "What's that?" She looked out over her people, seeing the fire in their eyes, the grit in their stance. "We have something worth fighting for, something they'll never understand." The defenders of Haven assembled at the walls, gripping their makeshift weapons, ancient firearms, modified drones, even sharpened farming tools. They knew the odds, knew this battle was one they likely wouldn't walk away from, but still, they stood, shoulder to shoulder, ready to face the tide. When Zyrax's forces advanced, it was like watching a storm crash against the shore. The alien army moved as one, a wave of steel and fire. The defenders fired back, bullets and lasers lighting up the battlefield. The ground shook with every explosion, the air thick with smoke and ash, but the people of Haven held their ground, unyielding. From the walls, Lyra watched her people fight with a ferocity that defied reason. Engineers who had never held a weapon fired with steady hands. Children ran supplies up to the front lines. Medics pulled the wounded to safety, patching them up before sending them back out. They were losing, inch by inch, as the aliens pressed forward, their sheer numbers overpowering the human defenses. But the defenders didn't falter. With every inch they gave, they made the aliens pay dearly, inflicting casualties far beyond what Zyrax had anticipated. It wasn't about survival anymore, it was about defiance. about standing tall in the face of inevitable destruction. As night fell, Cyrax himself descended onto the battlefield, his towering figure casting a shadow over the remnants of Haven's defenses. He approached Lyra, who stood bloodied but unbowed, her weapon raised. "Why do you fight?" Cyrax sneered, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "Your cause is lost. Your people are finished. What could possibly be worth this senseless resistance?" Lyra met his gaze, unflinching. "You wouldn't understand. You conquer, you destroy, but you don't know what it means to belong to something greater than yourself. We're fighting for our people, our planet, for every soul that has ever called this place home. That's something you can't destroy." Cyrax scoffed, "A noble sentiment, but it changes nothing." Lyra smiled, a fierce, unwavering smile. "Maybe not, but you'll remember us. Even when we're gone, you'll remember the ones who never surrendered." With a defiant roar, she rallied her people for one last charge. The defenders of Haven surged forward, meeting Cyrax and his forces head-on in a final, desperate clash. They fought with everything they had, each one knowing that this was their last stand, that they might fall, but that they would fall together. As the final explosion echoed through the mountains, scattering debris into the night sky, a quiet fell over the battlefield. Haven's walls crumbled, but the legacy of its people would live on. They had shown the invaders something they couldn't comprehend, that humanity's spirit was unbreakable, even in the face of absolute destruction. The last stand of Haven became a story that traveled among the stars, a tale of defiance that spread through whispers across alien worlds. Because in the end, it didn't matter that they were outmatched. What mattered was that they had chosen to fight, to stand for what they believed in, and that was a victory all its own. The stars were silent that night, their cold light a distant witness to the chaos unfolding below. Earth had become a battleground, the war between humanity and the alien conquerors stretching across continents, leaving cities in ruins and civilizations shattered. The invaders were relentless, and it seemed only a matter of time before humanity was wiped from the face of the planet. But that didn't matter. In a hidden base deep beneath the surface of the Earth, General Ezra Selva stood, staring at the holographic map of the world's fractured territories. The numbers were grim. A handful of human cities still held out, but the aliens were closing in. Every day, the reports came in: more civilians lost, more soldiers falling. The invaders' technology was advanced beyond a human understanding, their ships impervious to weapons, their armies countless. The resistance was faltering. But Ezra had seen this before. He'd seen humanity's resilience tested time and time again, and every time, it rose up stronger. "General," Lieutenant Mia Ross said, entering the command center with a grim look on her face, "we have a new update from the front lines. The northern stronghold has fallen. They're advancing toward the capital now." Ezra's jaw tightened. He'd known the news was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. "Prepare the evacuation plans. We need to get as many civilians out as possible." Mia hesitated. "General, we're running out of time. The aliens will be here within hours. If we don't act fast, the last hope of humanity will be gone." He nodded, his mind racing. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating. But Ezra wasn't a man who buckled under pressure. He glanced over at the wall of monitors, showing reports from all around the world, straggling bands of survivors, guerrilla fighters, makeshift defenses. They were all scattered, isolated, but they were still alive. The flicker of a signal on one of the monitors caught his attention, a transmission from an unmarked frequency, a beacon, buried deep within enemy lines. "Who's sending this?" he asked sharply. Mia tapped the controls and pulled up the transmission. The image on the screen flickered and then stabilized, revealing a figure, an older man with a weathered face, his eyes filled with determination. His military uniform was ragged, his hair graying, but there was no mistaking the fire in his gaze. "This is Captain Elias Morrow," the man's voice crackled through the speakers. "We've been holding the southern defenses for months. We've lost too many, but we're still here. We're sending out the signal to remind you that humanity's fight is not over. We may be scattered, broken, and battered, but we will never surrender. Never." Ezra stood frowning as the words hit him like a jolt of electricity. He recognized Morrow. The man had been a legend, a symbol of the human spirit, and now he was leading one of the last pockets of organized resistance. Ezra's voice was steady, but there was a fire burning in his chest. Hold on, Captain. We're coming. We'll unite the factions. We'll bring the fight to them. Morrow's face tightened with resolve. You'd better hurry, General. We're holding them off, but not for much longer. Earth's flame is still burning, but it's flickering. You have one chance. Don't waste it. The transmission cut off abruptly, and Ezra turned to Mia, his eyes sharp with purpose. Prepare the fleet. We're not waiting for them to take the capital. We're going to hit them hard. Nah, it's time for one last stand. For the first time in months, there was a glimmer of hope in the air. Ezra knew the odds were against them. The humans' forces were small, their technology primitive in comparison to the alien might. But what the invaders didn't understand, what they could never understand, was the power of a human heart, the determination that could never be crushed. They gathered their force as soldiers, scientists, civilians, all coming together to make a final stand. The humans who had survived, who had fought, who had bled, now stood united. They were battered, yes, but they were not broken. In their eyes burned the spirit of resistance. The battle that followed was like no other. The alien forces, expecting an easy victory, were met with an unexpected ferocity. Human fighters, long accustomed to losing, now fought as if every moment mattered because it did. They knew their fate, but they also knew something the aliens could never understand. The battle for Earth was not just about weapons or armies. It was about the will to survive, the will to endure, the will to fight for a future, no matter how small the chance. And they fought with every ounce of strength they had. Hours turned into days, and while humanity's forces dwindled, they made the aliens bleed for every inch. Ezra and Mia, alongside Morrow and his squad, led the charge, pushing the invaders back, even if only for a fleeting moment. It wasn't victory. They weren't going to win this war, but they would make the aliens remember. They would make them understand that humanity, even in its darkest hour, would never be broken. As the last of the human forces retreated, the invaders regrouped, their fleet vast and imposing. Yet, as the sun set over the ruins of the battlefield, one thing remained clear: humanity's fire had not been extinguished. The flame of hope, of defiance, still burned. And no matter how many times Earth was taken, how many battles were lost, that flame would never dim. Because the invaders didn't know it didn't matter how powerful they were. As long as one human remained, there would always be hope. And as long as there was hope, there would always be the will to fight. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info.